Good evening and welcome. Everything you wanted to know about Purim, its history, meaningful observance. It's wonderful to team together with JNet and Chabad.org. My name is Rabbi Shneur Wilhelm from Portland, Oregon. The Talmud, and if you had the ability to print out, or if you could see it live on the internet, the handout that we're going to be learning for this class. So if you turn to page 3, note number 1, the Talmud in Tractate Megillah 17a tells us that someone who reads the Megillah backwards has not fulfilled his obligation, which Rabbi Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, shares with us, and he says, what does it mean to read the Megillah backwards? Reading the Megillah backwards means to read the Megillah as a historic event, an event of the past. The Megillah is a current event story. What is this story? What are we celebrating? What are we observing? So join me as we first look at the details of this story, apply it to our lives, and recognize what the celebration that we're going to celebrate this Thursday, Wednesday night, Thursday, the festival of Purim is. You know, our story really takes us back to the year 3338, 423 before the Common Era, when unfortunately and tragically, the first temple was destroyed. A 70-year exile thus began. In the year 3390, 371 before the Common Era, before the end of the 70-year exile, there was a time period where actually the Jews were allowed to travel back to Israel and begin to rebuild the Second Temple. Tragically, informants went and lied to the current king at the time, telling them that the Jews were rebelling, and the king thus halted the building that they had begun. And again, the Jews returned to the exile, the Babylonian exile that they were in. You know, before I continue, when I was a student in yeshiva, there was a joke we would share with each other, and that was, what happens if Hanukkah falls out on Purim? What happens if Purim falls out on Pesach? Well, it's a cute joke, but let me share with you that momentarily we're going to learn that actually the story of Purim happened on Hanukkah, and the story of Purim happened on Pesach. How? Well, at this time, we're now in the year 3392. 369 for the Common Era, and this takes us to verse 1 of the Megillah. Now it came to pass in the days of Achashverosh, Vayihi bimei Achashverosh, Achashverosh now becomes king. 3392. In the third year of his reign, the Megillah continues in verse 3, in the third year of his reign, he made a banquet. And at that time, as we know, King's request to come to the party party immodestly. And the king listened to the advice of Haman, and he had her killed. And again, at that same time, the verse in the Megillah continues, chapter 2, verse number 1. And the king's young men, his servants, said, let them seek for the king young maidens of beautiful appearance. That's we're now in the year 3395, the third year of the reign of King Achashverosh. 4 years pass while this contest is looking for the queen, for the wife of King Achashverosh takes place, and it is 4 years later, during the days that we currently celebrate as Hanukkah, on Rosh Chodesh Tevis, in the year 3399, that Esther meets the king for the first time and becomes his wife. As we see, Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevis, in the seventh year of his reign. She becomes queen. And as we know, Mordechai instructs Esther, do not share who you are and where you come from. That same year, the story of Bigsan and Seresh, the king's two advisors, and as the verse, as we have in number 2, within the year 3399, Bigsan and Seresh, two of the king's servants, the guards of the threshold, become angry and sought to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus, chapter 2, verse 21. And they plotted against the king. The king found out through Mordechai, hearing them, sharing the news to Esther, who shared it back to Ahasuerus. They were caught and killed. Esther is queen for a few years, not knowing why is she suffering. This Jewish girl, who at the time that she became queen was 40 years old, so a Jewish woman, and she's married to King Ahasuerus, which for her was torture. Why did this happen? And it took 5 years. 5 years later, the story of Purim happens. We're now in the year 3404, 357 before the Common Era. Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Mordechai, Haman, 5 years later, now is raised to the second in command, and everyone has to bow down to him. Haman kept an idol on him. And so when everyone would bow down to him, essentially they were bowing down to an idol. Jews not allowed to do that. And Mordechai would not bow. Haman is infuriated. He's furious. And thus, as the verse in number 7 of the Megillah tells us, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Haman casts the pot, and the lot falls out. For the following 11 months later, the lot falls out on the 13th day of Adar. Okay? The lot happens Rosh Chodesh Nisan. 13 days later, by then already, the verse tells us the king's scribes were summoned in the first month on the 13th day, and it was written according to everything that Haman had ordered. So now the decree of Haman to destroy all the Jewish people, God forbid, on the 13th day of Adar in 11 months, is now sent out. So far, if we calculate, Haman made this lottery Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and 13 days later now, the decree is made public. Watch how the story of Purim is going to complete within another 3 days. That same day, the 13th day of Nisan, Mordechai found out. He sat with ashes on his head, and Esther was informed. And Mordechai tells Esther, this is why you are queen. Your job now is to go to the king and plead for your people. And we could continue on, as you see in your handout, on the 13th of Nisan. Mordechai knew all that had transpired. And Esther turns to Mordechai. She says, fair enough. I will go to the king. And as she says the words, V'ima vadati avadati, and I will be lost. I'm going to the king now. It's my decision. I'm going to meet the king on my own accord. But she asks Mordechai to begin a 3-day fast. Now, when is this 3-day fast going to fall out? You got it on Pesach. Pesach is the 15th of Nisan. So the decree was written on the 13th. They fast the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th of Nisan. That means the Jews are going to fast the 2 first days of Pesach. So Mordechai turns to Esther and he says, Esther, how can we fast on Pesach? What's going to be with this Seder? And Esther tells Mordechai, she says, what value does the Seder have if there won't be a Seder in 1 year from now? And Mordechai hears the comment of Esther, he agrees, and he orders a 3-day fast. On the 15th day of Nisan, this is now the first day of Pesach, Esther, as the verse in chapter 5, verse number 1 tells us, Esther clothes herself with royal clothing, and she stood in the inner court of the king's house. She's going to meet Achashverosh. And she tells the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared. The king and Haman come to her party. Haman is in a good mood, and as he leaves the house of Esther's party, he sees Mordechai. And Mordechai does not bow down, and he's furious. Everyone bows down to Haman. I just was invited to the queen with the king, the 2 most mighty people, and you're not going to bow down to me? And thus, then Haman saw Mordechai in the king's gate, and he neither rose nor stirred because of him. Haman was filled with wrath against Mordechai. And thus, as the Megillah continues in verse 14, that the advice of Haman's wife was, let them make a gallows 50 cubits high, 75 feet tall. And that is what Haman does. He makes a gallows 75 feet tall. Okay, that's the 15th, the first day of Pesach. This is 2 days after the decree is made public. On the beginning, the night of the 3rd day, that is when the verse continues in chapter 6, verse number 1. On that night, the king's sleep was disturbed. The king couldn't sleep. Achashverosh couldn't sleep. And what happens when he couldn't sleep? He said, bring the chronicles. Let me hear what's going on in my kingdom. And the chronicles are brought, and he hears the story. How 5 years earlier, Mordechai had informed Esther, who in turn informed the king of the plot against Achashverosh, the plot of his servant's big son and Esther to kill him. And he asks. Achashverosh then turns to his servants and he says, what has been done for Mordechai? What have you done for him? Such a good thing. He has saved my life. What has been done? And they say nothing. And the king says, aha, I must honor him. In walks Haman. Haman now has just finished building his 75 feet tall gallows, and he comes to the king to get permission to hang Mordechai. As he walks in, Achashverosh turns to Haman and he says, Haman, there is a man that I'd like to honor in this kingdom. What should be done? Haman thinks, who would be honored more than me? And he says, wow, this is crazy. You should honor this guy, put on the king's crown, the king's royal garments. He should go on the king's horse, and a man should lead him around town saying, Kacha yeyaseh la'ish. So thus should be done to the man who the king wishes to honor. Achashverosh turns to Haman and he says, wonderful. Go do that to Mordechai. Haman doesn't know what to do. Mordechai, I came here to ask you to hang him, and now you're telling me to do that to him. So Haman starts ecking and becking. He says, Mordechai, there's so many Mordechais. Which Mordechai do you mean? And the king instructs him, as the Megillah says, Mordechai that stands by the king's gate, Mordechai sheyosheh b'shar hamelech, the one that sits by the royal gates. That Mordechai, take him and take him around town, like you have just said. And as you continue in your handout, you could see the verse quoted, chapter 6, verse 11. So shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. And Haman is the one walking Mordechai around saying these words. Haman takes Mordechai around. And his own daughter observes two people. She knows it's Mordechai and Haman. One on the horse, one walking the person. Who is obviously on the horse? She thinks to herself, Who is the one pulling? Well, the one on the horse, obviously, is my father, the great Haman. The one pulling, the one to be embarrassed, the one to be degraded, is certainly Mordechai. And she takes garbage and she pours it onto the man walking and leading the horse. And thus, not only was Haman degraded to take Mordechai around town, but he's now filthy. He gets home. And at that time, it was already time for the second feast. By the first feast, when the king had come with Haman to Esther's house, he said, Esther, what would you like? Esther said, you know what? Come tomorrow and I'll tell you what I would like. Well, it's already tomorrow. Haman is now a wreck, but it's late. And the king's guards come and pull Haman and they say, just come right now the way you are. And he comes in this position to the second feast. At that time, the king Ahasuerus turns to Esther and he says, what could I do for you? Up to half of my kingdom I'll give you. What was Ahasuerus saying? I'll give you half of my kingdom. What's half of my kingdom? And the commentators say, Ahasuerus said, Esther, I'll give you everything aside permission to rebuild the second temple. Fascinating. It's crazy. He's willing to give everything aside for the rebuilding of the second temple. Okay. Esther is there, and she turns to the king and she says, if I were to be a slave, that would be okay. But there is a man who plans to kill my nation and I. The king is shocked. He says, who? Who's this person who wants to kill you? My own queen? And Esther turns to Haman and she says, Haman, Harasha Hazeh, this wicked man, Haman. And Haman is then hung on his own gallows, 70 feet tall, which he wanted to hang Mordechai. And they hanged Haman on the gallows. And the king took off his ring, which he had removed from Haman, and gave it to Mordechai. The Jews seemingly are safe. Wow. Haman has been killed, but no, they're not safe. Why? Because there was a law at the time that any decree a king makes can never be revoked. Well, the king has sent messengers out with this decree that on the 13th day of Adar, in 11 months, kill all the Jewish people. So Ahasuerus says, I don't know what to do now. Okay. So what was decided is, and it happened on the 23rd day of Sivan. Now we're already talking 2 months later. After Haman was killed, 2 months later, messengers are sent out. And let's see that inside in our handout. Again, we're on page number 2 of the handout, where it says, number 6, the 23rd of Sivan. And the king's scribes were summoned at the time in the 3rd month. That is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. And they went around sending out a new decree. And the new decree said, yes, there's the original decree, but the new decree was the Jews should defend themselves and kill anyone who wants to start up with them. That same day, Mordechai left the king's presence with royal garments, blue, white, a huge golden crown, a wrap of linen and purple, and V'ha'ir Shushan Sahala V'samech, and the city of Shushan shouted and rejoiced. Okay, so now already the Jewish people has a backup plan. We can't revoke the first decree, but we have a new decree that the Jewish people should defend themselves and kill anyone who wants to attack them. It's still scary. The 13th day of Adar comes 11 months later. It's a scary day. And people did start up with the Jews. As we see in verse number 1, as we see in the year 3405, 356 before the Common Era, where it says, number 1, and in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day thereof, when the king's order and his edict drew near to be put into execution, on that day the Jews' enemies, looking forward to ruling over them, it was reversed. The Jews should rule over their enemies. And the Jews fought. There was a war. And on the 14th day, Now the rest of the Jews rested on the 14th day. But the Jews of Shushan, they continued to fight. Now the Jews who were in Shushan assembled on the 14th day of Adar as well. And now on the 15th day of Adar, the Jews who were in Shushan rested on the 15th thereof and made it a day of feasting and joy. So now we have a lot clear. Let's just kind of summarize what we just said. The war was the 13th day of Adar. The Jews rested on the 14th of Adar, the day of Purim. So we celebrate Purim on the day the Jews celebrated. And that is why there is something called Shushan Purim. A Purim of Shushan. What is it? Why? Because Shushan fought not only on the 13th of Adar, but also the 14th. They only rested on the 15th. So most of the world celebrates Purim on the 14th when they rested from the war. But Shushan, and our rabbis instituted any city that was surrounded by a wall, those cities celebrate Purim on the 15th day of Adar, because they fought also on the 14th. A year later, in the year 3406, now Queen Esther, the daughter of Abigail, and Mordechai the Jew wrote down all the acts of power to confirm the second Purim letter. That means now the Megillah is written, and the Megillah becomes one of the 24 holy books of scriptures. That same year, Achashverosh dies. Interesting. The same year that the Megillah was instituted as one of the 24 scriptures, Achashverosh dies. Esther's son, Esther and Achashverosh's son, Daryavish, becomes king. Maximum he could be at that time is 7 years old. He's 7 years old, and he becomes king over the entire world, as the Talmud tells us. And the following year, he allows the second temple to be rebuilt. Okay. So here we have the Purim story. It's a story of about 14 years. The actual time period from when the decree of Haman went into place until Haman was hung, that means the vicious decree and the tremendous, the ultimate worry of the Jews was actually only for 4 days. But when we look at the story of Purim, it looks completely natural. What happened? The king, he didn't like Vashti, he killed her. Esther was beautiful, he decided to marry her. She happened to be Jewish. Haman was upset at Mordechai. He wanted to kill him. Okay, well, luckily the queen was Jewish and she saved the Jewish people. It could look natural. God is hidden in this story. And that is why the Megillah does not even once clearly say the name of God. Not even once. And now let's talk about the Gragger. This kind of leads us into the Gragger. You know, a dreidel, you spin from the top. There's a little stick at a dreidel on Hanukkah, you spin it from the top. Why? Because on Hanukkah, we saw God revealed. There was a tiny army against a mighty army. To win was a miracle. Purim is the exact opposite. The stick is on the bottom. God was concealed. That is one of the reasons for the formation of the Gragger. But let me share with you, what's the origin of the Gragger? Where does it come from? The Torah tells us that we need to destroy the nation of Amalek. Haman was a descendant of Amalek. So every year when Purim would come, there used to be a custom for children to take a piece of wood and write Amalek on it and scratch it out. And that scratching evolved to the current Gragger that we have. Covered the history of the story of Purim, and when we ask what is the current event story of Purim, it's clear. People are standing up against us. And God is there to protect us. It may look natural. You know, they say there was a man in Manhattan looking for a parking space. He couldn't find one. And he makes a deal with God, and he says, God, if I get a parking space within a minute, I will give $5,000 to charity. I'll start joining shul. I'll go to shul every Shabbos. I'll keep kosher. And he's going on. And as he's saying that, all of a sudden, a parking space appears. And he turns to God. He's like, God, you know what? I found it. It's canceled. No need for your favors anymore. At times, we think that God is hidden. But God is leading every step of our life. And we'll see good and blessing if we look deeply within everything. So let's talk about the mitzvah and mitzvot of Purim itself. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the 23rd of March actually is a fast day. Why is it a fast? It's called the fast of Esther. We fast from morning till evening. Where does the fast come from? Remember, we just discussed that the 3-day fast that Esther initiated was actually around Pesach. It fell out on Pesach. So why do we fast the day before Purim? Not only why do we fast the day before Purim, but why is it called the fast of Esther? Let it be called the fast of Purim, the fast of Mordechai. Why are we fasting? The 13th of Adar was a war. The Jewish people were fighting for their lives. When there is a war, everyone who is fighting cannot fast, but anyone not fighting must fast. The war of Purim, Haman's decree was against man, woman, and child, regardless of who they were, as long as they were born a Jew, as long as they were a Jew. So the war on the 13th day of Adar, who was fighting was man, woman, and child. Who was the only person secure? Esther. The only Jew that needed to fast during the war of the 13th of Adar in the story of Purim, the only person who fasted, the only secure person was Esther. And that is why the fast is called the fast of Esther, because she was the person to fast. And to commemorate her fasting on the day of the war, we will fast tomorrow morning. It is a simple fast. It's one of the more lenient fasts, I should say. And thus, if someone has a hard time fasting, pregnant woman or nursing woman do not need a fast. And again, if there's any medical concern, please contact your local rabbi. So now we lead into Purim itself. We read the Megillah twice. We give money to poor people. The gift baskets, mishleach manais. And we have a meal. Well, let's talk a little bit about all these details. Adar and Purim bring tremendous joy. Mishenichnas Adar marbin b'simcha. We have to be happy. And on Purim, we have to be specifically happy. Let's talk about the meal we need to have on Purim, and let's talk about this happiness. I would like to share with you a mind-boggling story that the Talmud shares with us. On your handout, the story can be found on page number 4, number 9. Rabbi said, "It is the duty of a man to mellow himself with wine on Purim until he cannot tell the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai." Okay? So, on Purim, we have to be happy, and so happy that we can't tell the difference between blessed be Mordechai and cursed is Haman. The Talmud continues. Rabbi and Rabbi Zera joined together in a Purim feast. They became mellow, and Rabbi arose and cut Rabbi Zera's throat, effectively killing him. On the next day, Rabbi prayed on behalf of Rabbi Zera and revived him. Next year, he said, Rabbi turns to Rabbi Zera and he says, Rabbi Zera, will your honor come and we'll have the Purim feast again together? And Rabbi Zera replies, he says, a miracle does not take place on every occasion. Quite a story. One person seemingly killed another person. What's going on here? So firstly, he didn't kill him. The commentators have tremendous insight. He inspired him with his tremendous knowledge. Rabbi was from the third generation of Talmudic authors. And he invited Rabbi Zera, he inspired him. And the inspiration made him pass out. But nonetheless, I want to talk about the key factor in that story. And that is that on Purim, we have a requirement to become so happy that we can't tell the difference between cursed is Mordechai, blessed is Haman, blessed is... Cursed is Haman, blessed is Mordechai. I guess I'm getting confused myself already. What does that mean? Well, a few observations. Observation number one, do the math. I've done it, and I challenge you. Take the words Baruch Mordechai in Hebrew. Beis Reish Vav Chaf. Baruch Mordechai Mem Reish Dalid Chaf Yud. Take the numerical value of those words, and then again go ahead and take the words Aror Haman, which stands for cursed is Haman. Aleph, Reish, Vav, Reish, Aror, Haman, Hey, Mem, Nun. And see what it brings you to. And you'll find out that they both have the numerical value of 502. Both of those two words. Okay? But why do we want to... And so therefore the Gemara is saying that you should be so inspired that you're not able to do that math. But why does the Gemara want us to get confused? Why does the Torah want us to get confused between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai? And I'd like to share with you one of the most beautiful answers shared with us by the Turei Zahav, the Taz. He says, on Purim, we celebrate two things. We're celebrating cursed is Haman. We're celebrating the fact the downfall of Haman. We don't celebrate his downfall. A Jew does not celebrate the downfall of a wicked person. But we're celebrating the fact that God firstly saved us against the wicked decree of Haman. And second of all, that's our Haman, cursed is Haman. The second celebration we have is that blessed is Mordechai. Mordechai became the second in command. Just like we say Pesach, we have this whole song, Dayenu. You know the Dayenu, 14 things we thank Hashem for. We say, if you would have only done this, it would have been enough. Well, the same thing is Purim. If Hashem would only have saved us from the hands of Haman, Dayenu would have been enough. So therefore, we have two things we thank Hashem for. Not only he saved us from the hands of Haman, but Hashem went ahead and also blessed Mordechai. So we're saying you should become happy enough that you don't have the mind to focus on both of these two details. It does not say, to clarify, that you should become intoxicated and drunk to a level where you're non-coherent. Actually, that would be inappropriate. If someone, by drinking, comes to a state where they're non-coherent, they can't talk to God properly, they won't remember to wash hands if they're going to eat bread, they won't remember to pray to God, they're going to act inappropriately, that's tragic. And certainly that is not what the Talmud is sharing with us. But yes, the Talmud is sharing with us that we should be more happy, certainly drink some wine, certainly have that inspiration. Someone that is not in the ability to do so, to come to that happy state, so the commentators do tell us they should go ahead and take a nap. We know when we take a nap, our mind relaxes, and again, we're not able to have that focus on blessed is Mordechai, cursed is Haman. So we have this meal, this wonderful meal on Purim. Similarly, there's a mitzvah. We go ahead and we give money to the poor. Two poor people. Give them any amount. Ideally should be to each person $5. Why $5? Because with $5 we say that each poor person could buy a meal. And you want to give them something substantial enough with which they can go and buy a meal for themselves. When it comes to giving gifts of food to the poor, mishleach manais, we only need to give one person. So giving gifts of food to the poor, giving money to the poor, matanot lev yonim, we need to give to two poor people. Mishloach manos, gift baskets of food, should have 2 items, but to only 1 person necessary. When we're giving gifts of food, we're doing something fun. So the Torah tells us a man should give a man and a woman should give a woman. Men should build that connection, that friendship with men, woman with woman. But there's another reason why the Torah doesn't want a man to give a present to a woman and a woman to fast. So that to create a marriage bond, to create marriage between husband and wife, one of the things necessary is you take a ring, the husband takes a ring, he puts it on his wife, on the finger of his wife. He gives her a present. So there is a slight suspicion that if a man would give a present to an unmarried woman, so perhaps that could create a small marriage bond between the 2 of them. And thus, the rabbi said, presents should be man to man and woman to woman. There's a common misconception about giving these gift baskets to this other person, this one person, that it needs to be food of 2 different blessings. But that's not necessary. It should be 2 food items, 2 different food items, but they do need to be ready to eat. So if you go to the store and you buy someone a box of macaroni that he needs to now cook, that would not fulfill the obligation. However, if you give them something ready to eat, 2 food items ready to eat, that would certainly do it. Let's focus, and with this we're going to kind of take the remaining time and talk about the Megillah. The Megillah is something men, women, and children need to hear. Many things the Torah does not require women to partake in. Women are very busy. Women have very important and holy tasks. And because of that, the Torah does not require them to do many of the mitzvot that are limited to time. The Megillah is limited to a specific time. It must be read the night and day. Nonetheless, because women were involved in the decree was not only to kill men, but women and children similarly. Thus, the mitzvah to hear the Megillah is for men, women, and child. And children. B'roivam hadras melech. When you have more people together, we glorify the king in a greater way. We glorify God in a greater way. Thus, when we hear the Megillah, we should try to go to shul and hear it in a fashion with many people together. Celebrate. In your city, I'm sure there's a wonderful community celebration. Join the celebration. Go out and show how proud you are to be a Jew. How proud you are of your Jewish heritage. When I was a 7th grader, at the time I was a yeshiva student in Los Angeles. And I went with a group of students to a fellow shliach, Rabbi Kornfeld, a shliach in Burbank, California. We went to him, and I'll still remember this image, will forever be with me, the lesson I learned. I was the youngest of the group. The others were 4 or 5 years older than me. And it was a wonderful party. Amazing crowd, amazing energy. Everyone there heard the Megillah. And yet after the event, we went to Rabbi Kornfeld's house. And I remember the other students having this massive debate. There was one word. The person who read the Megillah, I wasn't sure. Did he say it this way, that way? How did he say it? The students couldn't recall. And we sat there, we heard the whole Megillah over again. The Megillah has to be heard word for word, and we have to hear the words pronounced correctly and clearly. The Megillah similarly should not be heard and cannot be heard over a microphone. If you hear it over a microphone, you've not fulfilled your obligation. So let's summarize what we've learned. And with this, we'll conclude. We've gone through the history of the story of Purim. We spoke about how it started already with the exile of the Jews following the destruction of the first temple. And effectively, the entire story was complete 70 years later when the Jewish people then went ahead and rebuilt the second temple. We discussed the 4 mitzvot of Purim, the mitzvah to read the Megillah tomorrow night already, Wednesday night, and again Thursday morning. We continued discussing how on Purim itself, Purim day, that's going to be Thursday, we have 3 commandments that can only be fulfilled on Thursday itself by day, not at night, which are giving to poor people, matanot le'avionim, something towards charity, giving one person a gift basket with 2 food items, and having that celebration being happy. And when I talk about happiness, the Arizal, the holy Arizal, the famous Arizal, one of the founders of the Kabbalistic energies that we have today, he shared all his inspiration. Where did it come from? It all came from his happiness. Simcha poretz geder, energy, positive energy, happiness could break all boundaries. If we're going through a tough time, what should we do? We have to find it. It may be tough, but find happiness and celebrate. And that is the message of Purim. Fellow friends, take the energy of this coming Wednesday night and Thursday, the energy of Purim, the happiness. Share it with your family. Share it with your friends. Share it with your community. And let's go ahead together and energize and draw down godliness throughout this whole world, and again, through happiness. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to JNet and Chabad together. Happy Purim.
Shneur.